My name is Clive Matthews, and I'm a special education needs advisor and sometime advocate. My background is quite varied. I've worked in a couple of child development centres many years ago with preschool children. I've worked in an independent residential special school, which has since closed, nothing to do with me. An independent residential special education needs college, local authority peripatetic visual impairment team, and national charities across the country. So you see quite a varied experience. The anomaly possibly is my degree's in autism, although my experience is teaching visual impairment. I've also spent a couple of sessions working as a social worker in the Children with Disabilities team, so I have a pretty good understanding of the system amongst other things. Yeah. You're probably aware, especially the guys in here that have youngish children, that the local authorities' services are contracting. I'm not going to get into the political debate as to why, but what can we do to address this? As a consequence, I have written a number of books over the last 4 years to try and support parents in particular, try and make up this shortfall. Okay, so there are 6 in total written now, and I plan on writing I've written the first draft of the next 3, which is fundamentally be about preschool issues over the next year. Some 80,000 words to be put into the same kind of format that I have already produced here. The format, I think, is quite important. I'd like to make note about that, because when we're doing our training, obviously you have to read quite a lot of stuff, and people are sometimes intimidated by text, and also it's quite boring sometimes as well. So what I've tried to do is condense it. I use a lot of bullet points, a lot of subheadings, so potentially busy parents, and mums in particular, who finish work at 11 o'clock at night, pick up one of these books, read a couple of blocks of information, put it down and read it, and then come back to it again. So in other words, you don't have to read hundreds of words to extract the important information. So the books are, where to start, so I say, Independent Living Skills. There's a cookbook, because everyone knows it's flavour of the month, everybody wants to be a Jamie Oliver. So it's a cookbook. We'll talk in more detail about these in a minute. There's a book on mobility and orientation. Now, there is one area that really is massively under-resourced in the UK, as you're probably aware, is mobility and orientation. So young people, kids are not getting the support they need, the training they need. There's something on employment. Now, this is written again with visual impairment as the main disability discussed, although there are implications for other disabilities too. How do you make a CV look positive? How do you deal with discrimination, both in the workplace, obviously sensitively, and put over your case? Draw out the skills that you do have. Hopefully I've addressed it in this particular book. Now, on a more adversarial line, this one here is about accessing the curriculum. So what should the local authorities be doing to support teachers, children, teaching assistants, etc., in the learning environment? I've actually set out this. I'll go into all these in more detail in a moment. In fact, I'll probably try and read a little bit from each one as we go along. And lastly, it's do-it-yourself education advocacy. I'm not suggesting you do this, but you could, with this book, take a case through the tribunal and represent yourself. In here, there's enough information. I'll explore it in a little bit more detail in a second, but it deals in how do you manage conflict, how do you manage meetings, and also, can I say, even the people we come to work up, highly placed professional people, when it comes to their own child in a meeting, it's a completely different ball game, as you well know, to have a professional meeting when it's got nothing to do with you. So we tackle many of the issues there. Now, I propose dealing with that one last, and so it'll give anybody if he wants to raise a question, please do, and I will try and offer forth on the subject. Again, I say please do, because often we do find, I suspect everybody in this room, you'll find it, more than one of you thinking the same thing. So please ask, and I suspect you'll be doing everybody else a favour by asking it. Okay, so that's where we are at the moment. So under the heading of meeting unmet need, if you don't do it, who will? I'll begin with the first one. So here we have independent living skills. Feel free, by the way, later on, have a look through these for yourself. So what I'll do is I'll read a section from each one to give you a flavour of what it's about. Okay, in the way I've actually just written it down. So under the heading of meaningful inclusion, underdeveloped independence has a major impact on meaningful inclusion. When the child is young, you can take her or him with you when visiting friends and family. She can then play in the garden or in other safe, controlled environments. But later, can she eat independently, go to town unsupported, or keep up with other teenagers doing what teenagers do? And then another subheading, developing skills. Children need to learn independent skills in order to eat, drink and socialise independently. This involves developing the confidence necessary to do these things for themselves. And then I give a suggestion. Independence can often be best achieved when activities are designed to combine a supporting learning experience whilst trying something new and fun. Okay, so you've got a little bit of... the other point that is relevant to this is hopefully all the stuff you're getting practical. Well, try to leave the theory, there's nothing wrong in theory, try to leave the theory to another day. This should be all practical stuff. So for example, under the heading of building autonomy, we all must learn how to deal with frustration and disappointment. However, allowing your child the freedom to make meaningful choices and learn whilst maintaining support can be difficult. For example, when your child is accessing information in the shop, stand back and let her or him do it independently. When she is trying to find a bag of peas at the bottom of the freezer, give her or him time and space to do so independently. At times like these, you and your child may notice dependence, experience anxiety, frustration, and even anger. So flipping over. Expand in independence. As she becomes more independent, reduce your control of the situation and allow the child to regulate her or himself more by, for example, managing time independently. Trust her or his own ability and judgment and, for example, learn to be proactive. Learn and practice new independence skills. Provide opportunities for your child to make choices and encourage her questions, but also make it clear where she can get support. Okay, now for a more, just moving on slightly to the more practical side of this particular book, we're talking now about kitchen skills. Safety. Certainly in the beginning, when teaching your child, it is extremely important that you pay close attention to safety. For example, never leave her or him alone and unsupported in the kitchen. Now the subheading, be consistent. Always keep the environment consistent. For example, keep equipment in the same place and accessible. If you need to rehouse something, ensure that you tell your child and ensure she is given time and the opportunity to learn about accessing the new position. Another perhaps tip could be methodical and tidy. Always encourage your child to be methodical and tidy. This is necessary both to make learning easier and safe. When cooking, and certainly when starting to teach kitchen skills, only put out the ingredients and equipment necessary. Also, arrange them in the order of use. First to be used at the front, least to be used at the back. Pretty obvious stuff, yeah? But I try to put it in these books so you don't have to think about it. So it's all in front of you, you don't have to sort of deconstruct the actual exercise. Yeah? The idea, so that's the plan anyway. Under washing up, don't forget that the cleaning up process is part of the cooking at meal times. Therefore, include the child when cleaning the table, washing up and putting things away. Another pretty obvious thing to do, but see how it goes. And then later on we talk about cookers. what is the best one, a gas cooker or an electric one? We have suggestions in here, not only to decide, but also mark it up, if necessary, using bump-ons or high mark or whatever gun is available now to actually highlight the different dials. So that is that one there. But there's one thing on storage and labelling, because that is quite an issue too as well. Safety considerations here can include avoid storing items out of reach when your child needs to access them. If needing to reach high shelves, always use proper steps and not a chair, which could tip over. Plastic containers are safer than glass ones. Pretty obvious stuff. Again, in this book, hopefully, we have decided to put that in there for you all to read. Now, turning to, what was the next one? Oh yeah, cooking. The Jamie Oliver stuff. Setting out is again the same format as in bite-sized chunks. Setting out. When setting out, you may find a basic structure to learning useful. Start to develop an understanding of what constitutes quality and a healthy diet. Do a bit of cooking, but without heat. For example, produce a selection of salads and dips. When shopping, learn to discriminate quality by tasting, smelling and squeezing produce. Visit various food outlets like farmers markets, local butchers and fishmongers. Then, when in the kitchen, develop techniques like cutting and chopping. Again, I do emphasise this one is for the young person himself, ideally. That's not to say you couldn't teach it as well. Assessing your skills. To begin, consider the overall result you want to achieve, then devise a program. Design it to run for a measured period of time, taking into account the skills you have and the skills you need. Consider as part of the preparation process where you will be learning and any problems associated with the place. For example, are there any distractions? Is the environment cluttered? What equipment will you need? Is specialist equipment required? Ideally, everyday items will be used as far as possible. At what stage of learning are you? Do you have a number of skills with previous experience? Are there any issues needing to be considered along with the low vision? For example, difficulties manipulating items. Will you need support? And if so, when and from where will it come? All reasonable questions for the young person to ask themselves before setting out and starting. Under the heading of recipes and techniques, organising yourself and be tidy once again. Be distinctive. Cook so your food is noticed. If your recipe is light and delicate or full of flavour, it should still be distinct and clear. To help avoid wishy-washy food, use heat, seasoning confidently. For example, get your pans hot before adding ingredients, etc. You got the same sort of idea, you get the flavour there. Plan and prepare. Consider and plan carefully. For example, prepare vegetables by peeling and chopping them and par cooking them. Reduce the stock, get the garnishes ready. Work in this way will then leave you free time to concentrate on the dish's main elements. Again, stuff where we all know if we've done this kind of thing, but to a young person setting out, that may be quite a useful thing to actually to highlight. Under the subheading, don't panic. If you worry that something will go wrong, it probably will. Recipes are only there as a guide. A little bit too much of this or too little of that is probably not going to be a catastrophe. And then this particular book, what I've then done is a series of recipes and methods. So I'll just go down a couple of these to give you an indication of what is there. So under the heading of French dressing, there is a series of comments. We've all presumably made a French dressing, so I won't go into that one too much. But the comments read, lighten the dressing by not using all olive oil, but instead adding some groundnut oil. Good dressings make good salads. Salads can be eaten as snacks for lunch or dinner, etc. All these suggestions here. I go on. Oh, then we've got egg recipes. Starting with boiling an egg. Again, for someone who's never done it before, and the environment is potentially dangerous, it's an important skill that we all need to learn. So we got under their method, then we've got a comment. If you're preparing hard-boiled eggs after cooking, quickly cool in water to prevent the yolk discolouring. Again, things which we in the sighted community may have learnt over time by watching others, for someone with low vision, this might not be quite so obvious. I should also say I live in Wolverhampton. Wolverhampton is a highly, as you probably know, multicultural community. My next door neighbour, for example, though she died recently, some 80-year-old woman, taught me how to cook a great many Afro-Caribbean dishes. This is why in here we have got rice and peas, we have got jerk chicken, we have got Jamaican chicken curry. My other neighbours, the other side, are from the Punjab, so therefore we've got vegetable curries. We have got chapatis, we've got, so in other words, it's highly multicultural. There's some stuff in here now from Eastern Europe, and even something, a burger from America, because my neighbour opposite is American. So you can see, this is what you actually get by living in that kind of community. So, it's not your standard cookbook, regards fare. It is highly idiosyncratic for Wolverhampton. Oh, there's even a goat curry here, by the way, folks. If you're really, really interested in how to produce a good goat curry, I recommend it. It is fantastic. Okay, where are we next then? So moving on from there, the independent living skills, and I'll turn now to mobility and orientation, I think. In this particular book, excuse me just for a moment to get my papers together, this manual is designed to enable you to teach your child if necessary, although I wouldn't necessarily advocate that. Long cane skills can be both dangerous to yourself, as you know, and to other people. But you could use this book to teach, but also monitor the support given by others. You will cover things like, for example, sighted guide, indoor travel, different cane techniques, road crossings, teaching routes, assessments. I've also put in there 3 programs which I have used in a past life, and they do actually work. So you'll have a pretty good understanding, once again, about what to teach. So, take a little bit from this particular book to read a little bit about this. The level of mobility skills can, to a large extent, determine a visually impaired person's quality of life. The ability to move around can impact both physically and emotionally in relation to confidence and self-esteem. Although these points are recognised by many, it is estimated only a fraction of children or young people needing mobility training receive it. Aspects of vision affecting mobility. Mobility can be affected by reduced distance security, field vision restrictions, difficulties adapting to light and dark and vice versa, bright light or a cloudy day, strong lighting causing confusion, poor contrast sensitivity or poor depth perception. Okay, so these are the things which you might be quite useful to know about teaching the subject. Early training on this particular section here. The needs of those born with low vision can be very different from those who lose their sight later in life. Losing sight later in life usually means that the individual has a visual memory of the environment and is able to form mental concept of the surrounds. For example, she will know what buildings are like and how corridors and stairs fit together, have an understanding of space and how something fits within it. Those born with low vision may have a poor mental mapping system and thereby have problems forming a correct mental concept of themselves in space. Again, somewhat obvious, but not necessarily automatically thought about. What about it? Poor mobility skills can mean having to rely on others. Independent travel is extremely important to find, secure and maintain employment. Without being able to travel independently, journeys are expensive. This is especially the case when taxis are constantly necessary. Now, moving on from this, by way of mobility and orientation as an integral part of education. To develop the necessary skills, mobility and orientation needs to be an integral part of a child and young person's learning. It is not simply a process of mastering a few skills, which can be taught in a few weeks or months. A program for those with low vision, mobility is an educational necessity. They need independent skills to learn their learning environment, curriculum, social environment and wider community. Under the heading of transferable skills, mobility skills need to be transferable so that child or young person can become independent. It would be silly to say that an individual only learns numeracy to use in school. Numeracy is taught and designed for application in the wider world outside school. Consequently, the same principle applies to mobility. So therefore, folks, why isn't it taught on acts? However, it's another day. Underpinning skills. A functional grasp of the following is usually required. Sighted guide training, knowledge of the environmental clues, indoor orientation and safety clues, appropriate cane skills, etc. And then I go on to list the kind of skills which you want your child to develop within a mobility program. Okay. We cover also different canes, the different canes people might want to use, and there are a number of diagrams here which should certainly show my limited IT skills. However, they do show what you're actually trying to do with the cane. Moving on. I'll turn next to the more adversarial type stuff here, and this is, we'll look at the curriculum. What do you expect from your child, and what should the child have? And then I'll turn for do-it-yourself education advocacy. This, in a sense, will help you put what you want into place. Does that sound okay? However, I want to make something a bit clear here, because if you do decide to challenge, you will be putting yourself into an adversarial situation. You didn't invent the situation. However, it is, by definition, will then be a them and us. So if you do start to become adversarial, realise the opposition may come back equally as adversarial. Okay, so what I don't want to do in these particular sessions, I don't want to send people into a situation that they might find extremely difficult. Okay, that is not to say you shouldn't, in fact I believe you should, but just I see some of you look with a smirk, you know what I'm talking about. We all do, like many of us do.
So we get tastes of it, so not mocking, I'm just saying it.
No, not saying you're mocking.
That it can be kind of like, roll up your sleeves and get on with it kind of thing.
Yeah, it can be, but I see, you know what I'm talking about, don't you, in that sense, because let me give you one example. We can talk about this a little bit later, perhaps in a Q&A, but when I start working with people in this particular area, so you must put everything in writing. Now, some people find that particularly aggressive. They're not used to doing that kind of thing. But if, when push comes to shove, the opposition will do that, and then they'll build their case up accordingly. So I'm always doing it. I'm not suggesting you go in there to fight, but really just to do, play by the rules type of thing. We can talk about this in more detail, so I digress slightly. Please come back in a second with your questions. It's great that we're on the same page, certainly. If that was happened, welcome to the club sort of thing. Okay, so I want to talk about the curriculum, the kind of stuff which I'm talking about here, under the heading of meeting individual needs. Children and young people are, and here especially those with low vision, should have the same access to opportunity as their non-disabled peers. Adequate specialist support should be provided to enable learners to benefit fully from the opportunities and develop self-confidence, self-esteem and a positive attitude to learning. Under effective support, it is important to acknowledge that there are a great deal of dedicated and effective work taking place in the UK to meet needs of the needs of a disabled child. Particularly impressive are those who spend a great deal of their own time supporting learners. Consider especially the crucial role of teaching assistants who make the curriculum accessible, learn Braille, teach the learner whilst the class teacher teaches the class. He says that tongue-in-cheek, but it does go on inappropriately. It does go on quite extensively, actually. Assessing and allocating resources. Many of you will point out that parents should be listened to with their points taken on board by professionals. There should be better monitoring of specialist resources allocated to meet need. Resources should be allocated based on assessed need, clearly specified and quantified. Okay. What I'm encouraging you to do within this particular book is to monitor and record what actually is in place. So in other words, what I'm doing, Clive Matthews is saying this is what he believes should be in place. If you then monitor it, you can then see. Okay, so it gives you a benchline from which to start your request for more support or better support. Monitoring. Therefore, information contained in this book is designed to enable you to rigorously monitor your child's development. It highlights the resources which should be available 0 to 2, specialist support within schools, specialist support within further education, and specialist support during employment. So in other words, don't forget education, health and care plans now run up to 25, by the way, so now that hugely increases the support available or should be available later on in life, if it's still in training. One of the things which I've consistently tried to do throughout these books is highlight the skills we all need in life and how you're going to address it. I'm talking here about functional skills. I'm not necessarily talking about academic numeracy or whatever science. I'm talking about things like being responsible, working with others, managing information, working safely, communicating effectively, using numbers, demonstrating a positive attitude and behaviour, being adaptable, learning continuously, and problem solving. In other words, issues we all need to live effectively. How are you going to get it over to the young person and child? It's not, education for most of us is not an academic exercise, is it? It should be a functional one. So I say, how are you going to get those skills across to the child? Hopefully this information will help you to do so. It's a constant theme throughout these books, I do emphasise again, particularly the employment one, which I'll go through in a second. So a little bit further afield, what have we got? Oh yes, highlighting, I then sort of highlight the different stages in education. Yes, 0 to 4, 0 to 5, but this one here, 5 to 10 years old. Intervention, each of these areas may differ to a child's, may differ according to a child, personality, age when a vision impairment began, degree of low vision, adaptation, adaptive disability, additional disabilities, and cognitive skills. Starting school and meeting need. It is hoped that a teacher of the vision impaired will have visited the child at home and visited about meeting need, advised about meeting need. Is severely sight impaired, as in blind, this is more likely to take place than if the child is sight impaired, partially sighted. Before the child enters school, the specialist teacher should have assessed the environment and given training to teachers and teaching assistants along with anyone else coming into contact with the child. This is vital if a placement has never worked with someone visually impaired before. A transition plan should also have been produced so everyone has an understanding of need. Okay, so this is the kind of stuff which we're talking about here. I flick over a few more pages. Let's stay at primary because I think we're chatting a lot to parents who have younger children. So what might the low vision teacher be, the low vision teacher in primary school, what might she be doing? Well, developing early reading skills, for example, matching, sorting, counting, assembling, colour recognition and discrimination. She might deal with reading skills, following a line, scanning a page, finding detail, using picture clues, word building, numeracy skills, seeing numbers, groups, understanding layout and diagram, using instruments, measuring, reading tables, etc., etc., etc. There's lists here of what the actual you would expect a low vision teacher to be working on with your child during that particular process. Looking over. The same thing, you've got the same thing here, 11 to 19. The difference a child might encounter can be many. Following are a few which commonly impact alongside low vision. Secondary schools are often much bigger than primary schools. So I should make this a bit clearer. This is about transition. What's going through your child's mind, or what will be happening when moving from junior school into senior school? Well, one thing you can do is point out the differences. The differences might be secondary school are often much bigger than primary schools. Some may have several thousand learners, which may be daunting when compared to a primary school with relatively few. There can be many more teachers and support staff, over 100 in some cases, who will need recognising, and many, perhaps most, not knowing the child's specific needs. To compound orientation and mobility, difficulties there are likely to include the number of buildings to include more than one main building, quarter cabins, building with more. In other words, what I think I'm saying here, a transition plan is really quite important. Going from junior school to senior school, pretty important piece of kit. And a quantifiable one as well. This could also mean, incidentally, that your child actually going to visit the school before it actually starts. Visit a new placement. I'll read my own text here. So flicking over a bit further. Oh, one other thing in this particular bit, what I've done here is, it's very difficult sometimes deciding where your child is developmentally in comparison to a child who doesn't have low vision. So what I've done here is actually set out what you might expect a child who doesn't have a vision impairment. What kind of milestones might you expect between the age of 12 and 16? I'm not saying that they should be able to do both of the same skills. What I'm saying, you can gauge development accordingly, can't you? You have a line in the sand sort of thing. If your child can't do something, then you can put the support in potentially to encourage it to happen. So that's in there. I won't read it out because it's a bit. Oh, there's also another. The next one here, adolescence. Now, on top of the normal stuff which we all go through in adolescence, what are the issues that might be one for someone with low vision on top of the standard stuff? I mean, the classic one which you come across, for example, makeup, and highlighting the very issues the person might not feel that confident about. When her mates go out at night doing what teenagers do, thing, she can't go. The light gets worse. She can't, she needs support. Not much fun is it going out with your mates if you've got to get support. Yeah. So all these kind of issues which can compound that very, very volatile area. There are ways of addressing it, I do mention it here by the way, but never overcoming it of course. We talk about isolation, that's again another issue. Identify social and emotional skills and independence. This is another one. Opportunities to express control. An important factor for us all to develop. Without the opportunity to express control and make decisions, your young people may choose inappropriate ways of expressing themselves, and adolescents can usually accept constructive criticism, positive feedback. She needs to feel valued and appreciated with some way of gauging performance and behaviour. The young person all needs opportunity to show initiative, take responsibility, make decisions about her or his own learning and development. Yes, how are you going to do that if the person has low vision? It's more important factors. Okay. Anyway, I'll leave that one there. Turn now to education advocacy. Dependent children lead to dependent adults. If you don't address it, who will? Information within these books will enable you to compile and deliver a case, so therefore be armed and ready for school or local authority meetings, mediation and arbitration hearings. Topics covered include tracking and development, collecting evidence, meetings, conflict and negotiation, putting your case and acting like a barrister. Everyone knows how an actor barrister acts. You know where I'm coming from, folks. Yeah, nice one. Wendy Sainsbury over there, I remember when Jack Rabinovich, a very, very well-known solicitor, turned around to Nick Bowen, who was now the QC, and said precisely that. I don't need to bloody act, he says. So they think that way. So, okay, so let me flick through this particular book, and then I'll take some questions if anybody has any on this business of advocacy. Low vision, appropriate support and building a case. If a vision impairment is not addressed, it can significantly hamper learning. Extra support may be needed. To argue your case, evidence will be necessary. They then go on to list signs of a vision impairment impacting on the actual curriculum, on the learning environment. There's a great long list of these, and you should be able to get this with the VI teachers, but I just mentioned a few. If the child keeps blinking or rubbing her or his eyes, has watery, itchy or inflamed eyes, frowns, squints or appears at work, appears clumsy, finds it difficult copying from a black or whiteboard, uses fingers to follow work on a page. These are all indications. There's a great long list of here that indicating there is an issue with low vision impacting upon accessing the curriculum. Okay, I'll move on. Again, another section here on transition plans and audits. Really does provide a lot of evidence, folks, if you are considering challenging a placement. Transition plan, seeing what's available. Access and learning. Is information presented in an accessible format and at the time of fully sighted peers? If not, the child or young person is being denied access to the curriculum, with the subtext also saying, we don't care about you. Again, loads of mileage in there if you put it together. Okay, folks. This applies to all materials being correctly modified and adapted regarding, for example, print size and good quality photocopying in an accessible format on A3 or A4 sheets. Is this happening consistently? Examples of poorly modified and adapted materials represent useful evidence showing need not being met. Probably worth mentioning here two things which you really do need to pin down if you are channeling. One, need not being met, and the child regressing. If you can pin those down, those are really, really useful things to be able to do. So that's regressing, child regressing, or need not being met. I hope you don't mind me getting a bit confrontational on this. But anyway, it goes with the territory, I'm afraid. Visual fatigue and fatigue generally. Visual fatigue can be a significant issue for many with low vision. Consider therefore, has an optimum length of time been ascertained for the child or young person to rely on vision in order to access learning? For example, optimum time for efficient and effective visual learning may take place in the morning. Afternoons may then be best for oral or tactile learning. Timetables. The learner's timetable may need rearranging to allow time for training in mobility, independent living, touch typing, braille, specialist IT, social skills. Again, is this happening? An important point here, again, for those who are trying to address this, it's not something that can happen in one day, in 1 year, in 1 month, in one session. It needs setting over a great long period of time. If that, who's going to monitor it? If it isn't you, who else is going to do it? So you've got this constant, so the child doesn't arrive at 11-year-old, can't feed itself, can't dress itself, etc., etc., etc. In an age-appropriate way I'm talking about here. Lesson delivery. The area is inevitably large, but nevertheless crucial. It emphasises the need for support and training delivered by disability specialists in classroom teachers and assistants. Noting either these techniques will indicate whether a learner needs are being met. I then go on to list them. Okay, well, you want to know too much about that. If you can imagine the situation there. Addressing concerns. Keep examples of school or college work the learner can't access. For example, homework or classwork. Ask her or him if there are any times one-to-one support is needed but not available. For example, learning resources not modified and adapted or not delivered at the same time as peers. Ask a specialist in disability, for example, low vision, to interpret finding in terms of function. In terms of function, so really quite important on that. It's not theory, actually in terms of function. That is, based on the information you have presented, ask the specialist to interpret what the learner can actually see and can comment on the individual's needs. You might put a press on that one because you might not get an answer, surprise. Write down your queries in relation to these points and then speak to the learner's teacher, preschool, school teacher, SEN coordinator, head teacher or principal. Ideally, the head teacher or principal will support your concerns. However, this is not always necessary. Okay on that one? Right. So a couple more points. I will do a little bit on the employment book, and then please come back to me on any of these questions that we're dealing with now. Meeting techniques. To be effective in a meeting, there are a few basic skills. You should ideally be articulate, along with being able to spot an issue, sort out the relevant from the irrelevant, present an argument, explain points clearly. These skills can be helped or hindered dependent on a sixth sense, preparation. Never ever wing it, folks. If you go into a meeting, do your prep. Okay? No matter how good a speaker you are, thorough preparation is still necessary. Avoid winging it. Reports. If reports are to be sent, request copies 2 weeks before. Give the chair a copy of the points you wish raised 2 weeks before too, and request a copy of an agenda. Okay. Standard meeting techniques. There's more of those in there. Ways to influence meetings. Submit your own agenda about what you want for the child or young person. Back up your wishes by providing as much evidence as possible. Try to get professionals to support your position regarding the learner's needs. Ideally, get reports from those professionals who support your views and know the child or young person. Ask the head teacher to request reports from those professionals who support your position. Ask them to attend the meeting. If professionals disagree with, for example, the head teacher, reports, get them to write to the local authority, i.e. the head teacher. Get the learner's views about her or his education, for example, support in writing, if possible, and get her or him invited to the meeting. Also, if appropriate, that might not be appropriate. Also, study closely reports submitted by professionals and write down questions to be asked at the meeting. If you disagree with the minutes or reports based on the meeting, write your own report and submit it to the meeting's chair. Say on the first page that you want it attached to the report you disagree with. Okay? That's quite a useful one, actually. I do find that one. They might refuse to change the report because it is refuse to change the minutes because they aren't your minutes, but they can nevertheless attach bits to it. And finally, we turn now to employment. Information within this book will enable you to develop standard and creative techniques to find and sustain employment. Information often covers standard fare such as CV writing, letter writing, interview techniques, but this time specifically aimed at someone with a vision impairment. You will also discover how to assess and develop your employability skills. Contained within are examples of how to address and control the situation by way of positive disclosure, equal opportunities, and starting work. Equal opportunities. When we apply for a job or promotion, equal opportunities mean that we are all treated the same and judged only on our ability to do the job. It is illegal for an employer to discriminate based on disability, gender, colour, race. If you are treated unfairly because of, for example, your disability, there are organisations which can help, advise and support. For example, Disability Rights Commission, Equal Opportunities Commissions. Reasons for disclosure. If you have declared your disability, an employer cannot lawfully refuse to employ you without good reason and just because you are disabled. Reasonable adjustment. An employer must also consider making any reasonable adjustment, reasonable adjustments that you might need in order to work in the organisation. For example, if a specialist computer equipment enables you to overcome the effects of your disability, it would be unreasonable of the employer not to take this into account. An employer would have to decide whether it is reasonable to provide the equipment. Then go on and talk a bit more about access to work and funding, health and safety. Now there is an issue there, by the way. If you don't disclose your disability, there is a health and safety issue if something goes wrong. So be careful on that one. Battling discrimination. You may fail that in today's competitive job market. Employers will see no further than your disability and not look at your abilities. Employers will automatically see you as a problem, an extra expense, someone who needs special employment arrangements, someone who will take lots of time off through ill health. You may feel as also that an employer will see your disability as a dominant feature. Again, you can address all of this within the application forms and during the interview. Just in relation to this business about disclosure, because I can't emphasise this enough, it is really quite important. Having got an interview, you should have already told the potential employer that you have a disability. If you haven't, even if it has no effect on your ability to do the job, you run the risk of surprising the interviewers. Then, rather than focus on how you are suitable for the job, time is potentially spent addressing irrelevant questions about your disability, that is, unpicking information that should have been given on the application form or within the CV. Okay, controlling the situation, and finally, try and avoid an interview dwelling on your disability, especially any negative aspects. Job seeking can be a frustrating business, and it is sometimes tempting to use interview time as a chance to air past grievances. Employers want you to be positive, enthusiastic, suitable timing. Your disclosure will help control the way it's seen by potential employers. You can describe it in a positive way and any positive effects it has had on your life. For example, your disability may have encouraged a heightened awareness and respect for social diversity. Okay, so that is it. Any questions on but anything really, but the education advocacy perhaps?
Say something. That's it. I've got a loud enough voice anyway, haven't I, really? Don't need it. Thank you, Clive, up to now. Just something that made me smile was the bit about when children transfer from schools. This wasn't a visually impaired child, but it was something that I really hadn't thought that a child would find difficult going from primary school to secondary school. The child that was in my class came back to see me after he left, and I said to him, "How's it going? Is it good?" And he went, "Really strange, miss." And I said, "Well, why is that?" And he said, "They keep having fire drills." He said, "All day they have fire drills." And I said, "Do you have fire drills?" He said, "They do. They keep ringing a bell, and it's a fire drill." But it was the lesson bell. And it was like I would not have thought of saying to a child going from primary school to secondary school, a bell will go every hour, you have to get up and you have to move. This child for the first week thought it's a fire drill. I thought it was really funny, but for a visually impaired child, that's even more scary, really, isn't it? So yeah, anybody got any questions? Might be specific to them. Bring you over the microphone. Yeah.
Hi there, my name is Angie. My child's going to be going to high school in a year from now, so she's got visual impairment. There are some learning difficulties. The main question that I've got is what do I choose, like an element of the academic parts, or do I go for life skills? I mean, I know it varies, but like it's really, really tricky.
Unfortunately, I think you've got to do both. I mean, because one will true off the other, won't it? If, for example, take someone who has social communication skills as a result of low vision, that's going to impact all the time, isn't it? Whether you can count, read and write on whatever you can. So I think you've got to do both. The other thing is I would say, how old are your child? She's moving now, so she's 11.
She's going to be moving in a year from now, and I don't think there are options, but then they've said to me, you've got to think about whether you can go for more life skills rather than actual curriculum.
Can I ask you, we're talking here mainstream? Should we go into a mainstream place?
Mainstream with a base or more of a special.
Yeah. Should we both? Definitely both. See, she got an education, health and care plan.
Sorry?
She got an education, health and care plan.
Well, there's been an education plan in her primary school.
Yeah, well, in that case, definitely, yeah.
I don't know, it's hard. I want her to be independent. Grades will be grades, and I don't really care if she's keeping up with her peers. I just want her...
Make progress.
Yeah.
I think, again, I can't emphasise enough. I think you've got to do both. What you don't want... Any issues will kick off in the near future, I'm sorry to say. That's when they do come to the fore. During this transition time, it's a different education, moving from junior to senior school. And I think, but you've also got to do it over that particular time, so you don't arrive at a 16-year-old who can't independently shop, for example. Should she be capable of doing that in the first place? Yeah. You see, I think you've got to do it in a progressive way. So you can't do it all at one go. And this is, as many have said, it's a big ask, because on top of a standard education, you've got to be able to do all these different things on top. I mean, another mantra which I bring up here, we probably remember a leader of the country a few years ago, his mantra was education, education, education. Okay, I don't disagree with that, it's incredibly important. But most of us are not in education for the sake of education, we're in education for development and also employment. Yeah? So you need the basic skills, which we all do, numeracy, literacy, etc., etc., but also independent travel. I mean, for example, your child, so she's 19, 20, after university or whatever, and has to attend a meeting for work. That's going to surely mean independent skills, isn't it? That's going to mean social skills, that's going to mean getting to and from the place. See what I mean? They do impact. Unfortunately, you have to be able to, really got to be able to do both. But the point is I'd make is you do not want it all to happen in one go. Would you agree on that one, by the way?
I would.
It's got to be built into...
You've always got to look at how one impacts on the other. The question I want to ask is, does she have a statement of education needs, or does she hasn't transferred to education and healthcare plan?
It's just, I know that maybe she's not. I know that maybe she's not where she should be, but then what do? Do I focus on just getting her independent and getting her?
Obviously
there will be an element of education, of course it will, but then these other skills, it's hard to see.
Yeah, to these books, this is why I produced them, for that very reason. So you could help the situation. I don't want to set you into an adversarial situation. So catch what I'm about to say, with gloves on, okay?
Yeah.
The Education, Health and Care Plan is a legal document. You want to specify and quantify all the provision that you want in that document, and then the local authority has to deliver it.
Okay.
You see?
So set up all the evidence and the requirements and the needs and the case.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So, for example, if the independent living skills. So, for example, if she's going to do what we used to call domestic sample, I'm not quite sure what it's called now in mainstream, whatever it's called, she's going to have the skills to manage that in cooking environment, isn't she? To sort of, and they need the equipment in place for her to do it.
Is there something that might?
No, thank you. I think you've answered that. You talked about an education, health and care plan, but I think you said that she had an education, health and care plan. Has she got a current education, health and care plan now?
Well, there's a statement. And that's on the employment skills.
Statements are no longer. She should have transferred over well by now, and that education, health and care plan.
What's the authority?
Sorry?
What's your local authority?
What's my local authority?
What do you think?
Wales. Oh, Wales, yeah.
Wales.
Of course,
There's probably
there are
lots of
changes
them,
in Wales, aren't there, at the moment? So yes.
Well, they might be waiting till because there's a backlog, they might be waiting to do the education healthcare.
I think you need to chase it
I'm
up.
aware of the statements. Maybe I've missed something, but I'm just trying to figure out whether it's life skills more so that, I don't know.
Going back, I think you need to do both, but just in this issue of statements, tackle it gently. I do really think you need to address your local authority with it. If, as we think, you're English, you see, and they have changed it, and they're in the process of changing it, so I don't want to give you duff information. You see what I mean? If she has got a statement, she should have moved to a plan, as was being said a while ago. There's no real excuse that it hasn't been done, because if it hasn't been done, it should have certainly happened for a year, and that means they haven't reviewed the statement properly.
And the
They're
problem
abridging
is
it.
with the old statement is that it's an education statement, and the education and healthcare plan is much wider. It covers all sorts of things. So it would cover the life skills, and it would cover the education as well. Whereas the statement of education needs, statement of education needs only covers education needs. So whoever your
So that would be
contact
via
is,
the pediatrics?
no, you need to go back to the local education authority, and whoever you are in contact with, if you're not the school special needs kind of coordinator, ask to speak to them and say, can you just clarify, does she have a statement of educational needs? And if so, what point would she be transferring, or will she be transferring?
There's
education
definitely a
healthcare?
statement, but I'm not aware of the other.
No, but she should transfer to that.
I mean, just another thing in this particular important area, just to give you a flavour, if they are in breach of the state, that is to say they haven't reviewed it within a year, they're in breach, and that is a High Court job. That's serious. You see what I mean? So they should not, I'm not suggesting you go in that area, because obviously you've got to have legal support to do it. That's the kind of area we're into if they haven't reviewed the statement within a year. It's serious.
I think as well with Wales, I know there's so many changes as you probably don't absolutely know what they are, but I think they're moving more to the Scotland kind of assessment of need. And they're looking at, just looking at doing the assessment
it
rather
could
than
be generic. I just need to see what it is.
And it's,
I know that it was a statement. But
yes. And it's the question as well, I think, is whether will you be given the choice between academic and more vocational life skills, or is something you want to add to the academic curriculum as well?
so far so good. We've been working together. I guess I'm just pondering.
Yes. Thank you. So,
There is another route, of course. You could always apply for New College Worcester Independent School, £46,000 a year, and see how you get on with that one with the local authority. But hey, that's a good residential school, probably the way forward, isn't it?
Okay, we have one more question before we finish.
I just wondered, if your child does not get a disability allowance, does that affect them getting an education, health and care?
And incidentally, legally speaking, and there is law under this, case law, speech and language is an educational necessity. There's the case law on that one specific. So yes, it should very much be in there, and in a quantifiable way. The advice I'd probably give you then, you've got to get it into the part that dealing with the local authority, not the health authority, because the health authority can refuse. You must get it in the local authority, and they've got to provide it if it's in place. Yeah? That makes sense to you in that case.
So you were talking earlier about a statement. Do you draw up statements first and then education?
No. It was the system of statement of special education and needs. 2015, is it? It was 14. They were replaced by education, health and care plans. Many of us are wondering why now, because these plans are, well, I believe, too big, too comprehensive, not too big. So they replaced the same idea. It's a statutory definition. It'd be a statutory document for education support. In other words, it's backed up with law.
The main thing is it goes from very young to 25, isn't it? And it covers education and health and everything it needs, whereas the old statement was a much shorter time scale, went up to 16, I think.
Not up to 19, now it goes to 25.
Not
So that was expanded, it's the
and it
same.
didn't involve health, it was just about education. So it's about everything coming together and understanding that child's needs. So that it might be health need, the impact on education, and so the idea is to put it together. It is more complex, and some local authorities haven't got around to getting their children on their education.
Let's say also how it's impacted on my daily work. Send tribunals have employed 20 more judges to cope with this expansion. And also now, this is probably useful for anybody in here, if you have a case pending, the Send tribunal will take the case in August, which has never happened before, on paperwork only, because they're trying desperately to get away with the backlog. There's such a backlog of cases going through the tribunal at the moment. One of the reasons is, as just been mentioned by our colleague here, is because it's now to 25, 19 to 25, so that's a huge new group of people who now come under that umbrella. They got so far behind.
Thank you. We have to finish there, I'm afraid. Getting the eagle eye from Dave over there. Thank you very much, Clive.
If anybody got any questions, I'll be out the back there, so anybody wants to go any further. And also pick up a card, I've got some cards there, come back to me on phone. We can talk further about any issues, or more personally about personal issues if you want. Okay,